Tomorrow's the big showdown in Montreal. That's probably the biggest fight of my whole life. This great story I've been living for the last 15 years to come to an end. I talked to Vince, and he goes, "You have to lose to Sean in Montreal."
I can't do that. I can't do it. I described it to Vince, I just assume blow my brains out would be about the same, what you're asking me to do. And from a character standpoint, that's what I would be doing. I would be taking Bret the Hitman Hart, would blow his brains out. When people say wrestling, they talk about wrestling not being real. It's far more real than people think.
It is now time for Diary of a Wrestling Fan with Bill Chase. And now here he is, the man who can honestly say he never screwed Bret, Bill Chase. Thank you, Mr. Podcast Announcer, and welcome to another episode of Diary of a Wrestling Fan, the podcast that chronicles my 33 amazing years of being a fan of the wonder that is professional wrestling. Thank you for listening on Spotify, on Anchor, wherever podcasts are streamed. Hit that follow, hit that subscribe. And if you're listening on YouTube, hit that subscribe, like, and notifications bell right now. Well, indeed, this is an episode that a lot of people have waited for. Again, 23 years later, we're coming up with the 23rd anniversary of it in just a few days as I record this. The Montreal Screwjob. Again, you don't even need to say Montreal Screwjob. When you're talking about wrestling, all you say is Montreal. That's it. People know what you're talking about. There's even people who weren't born yet that I know that know about the Montreal Screwjob. Or that know about Montreal. Either way, it goes either way. But yes, indeed, we'll be talking about the most controversial subject in my lifetime anyway in the world of professional wrestling. And one of the most talked about maybe in the history of professional wrestling. But before we do, of course, I'm going to throw a quick plug to Pro Wrestling Ontario. Check us out on social media. Follow us on Twitter, on Instagram. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to us on YouTube. If you're listening to this podcast on YouTube, scroll above the video. You will see on the right there's a link. And of course, after you're done watching the video or listening to the podcast or whatever, click the link, hit subscribe to PWO. That's Pro Wrestling Ontario. Access to matches, complete shows, both Iron Cup tournaments, the backstage shenanigans, a foundation, and so much more. All right, folks. Well, here we are. We have come down to it. This is going to be part one of the Montreal Screwjob. Part two, I'm going to be talking to a few people, I guess you could say. I had quite a few that wanted to get involved, but sadly, either some didn't get back to me, or maybe that's a good thing because now I don't have room for everyone, so it's probably a good thing not everyone got back to me. But either way, I will be talking next week with local Ontario independent wrestler Outlaw Scott Chase. Been in the game better part of 2 decades now, I'd say at least. And also local fan, we call her the Diva. She's known as Bernadette. We'll be talking to her as well, plus a couple of others. So we'll be talking about 4 or 5 people, I'm hoping. So either way, get into that. That's part 2 next week of the Montreal Screwjob. Outlaw Scott Chase, a little bit of a spoiler. He was there. But again, definitely got to talk to him. All right. Now I get into it. Now, of course, as I left off last week's episode, talking about Halloween Havoc 1997. If you haven't listened to it yet, it's in the archives. Wrestling was red hot. I don't think I really need to tell you right now too many details about how hot wrestling is. If you're listening to this podcast, chances are you're either a fan who remembers this time or a fan who's learning a bit about it, but I'm pretty sure that a lot of diehards out there know that the late 90s was an amazing time for professional wrestling. And this is before the WWF started winning the ratings war. This is before they really, truly took off into the stratosphere. But that being said, however, their numbers were improving at this point. The product itself was really good. A lot of talents such as, guys like Mankind, Mick Foley finally moving up that, ascending up that ladder, have become, even though he had main evented pay-per-views in WCW, obviously he main evented in ECW, but either way, it seemed like Foley was becoming a star on the national level. that I believe he always desired to be. Again, you had guys like Hunter Hearst Helmsley, Triple H. Ken Shamrock was rising through the ranks at this point, and of course, a fellow by the name of The Rock, who was starting to garner some great heat from the crowd at this point. And you know what? There's also a lot of factions. That was hit or miss. So, a lot of you know, obviously, I've stated this, I don't know on how many occasions on this podcast. I don't really need to go into too much detail, but you know Bret Hart is my all-time favorite wrestler. Anyone who knows me personally, you know that. So, when I heard the rumors, I mentioned this on the previous podcast, when he was going to WCW, I still like WCW. I compare it to when Patrick Waugh, my all-time favorite hockey player, goaltender, legendary goaltender, second all-time in wins to this day, when he suffered a very controversial trade from the Montreal Canadiens, who was my favorite team, to the Colorado Avalanche. I still followed Waugh. The Avalanche kind of became my second favorite team by default because he was there. But you still want your favorite player on your favorite team. WCW, to be clear, even though I was watching them more and more, at the end of the day, even though I thought their product was better sometimes, WWF is still my favorite team. Colorado Avalanche were a better team than Montreal Canadiens for many years, especially when Waugh was there. But they were still my favorite team, even though if I was watching the better team sometimes. I hope that makes sense. Either way, you know, Bret Hart, at this point, had gone through that great run with the Hart Foundation. Something started to change. Now, I hadn't heard any of this until around October or so. But the story goes, for just the few of you who may not know, Vince McMahon, I guess it was for what most accounts say, it was during the Madison Square Garden Raw, the legendary Raw, where Mick debuted as made his WWF debut as Cactus Jack, even though he'd already been Mankind Dude Love, and also it was the first time Vince McMahon ever ate a Stone Cold Stunner. So a pretty historic night, a very memorable Raw that people still talk about to this day. Bret apparently was told, I guess, during this day, somewhere through the course of the day, that Vince may have to technically breach Bret's contract. Bret has signed a 20-year deal. Now, I know that's kind of weird for someone who, at the time, was 40 or pushing 40 years old. Bret was pushing 40 at this point. And Vince wanted to secure Bret because he knew Bret was a commodity. And Bret is, whether people want to admit it or not. He was. And I think Vince knew that Bret could be an asset to the company, even if he's not wrestling. So that's what the 20-year deal was supposed to mean. So basically, I guess with WCW doing really well at that point, and I will play devil's advocate here to show I'm not completely biased, even though the numbers were improving, even though the product was improving, WCW was still heavily winning the war. And I guess what they were paying Bret didn't justify what he was bringing in. Now, as a fan, I think that's Bret's the greatest, but looking at Vince's end of it, it's business. It's not saying that Bret wasn't a commodity, that wasn't valuable to the company, just maybe he wasn't perhaps bringing in the kind of dollars that his contract should justify. And with the company, even though they're improving, they're still not, I guess, over a certain hump yet. So I get that. But I didn't hear about this when it happened. The rumors didn't start until my dad had told me he read in the Toronto Sun that he might be going to WCW. And then Bret had alluded to this on episodes of Off the Record on TSN, which just devastated me. And at the back of my head, I'm thinking it's leading to him and Shawn at Survivor Series. And I can't stand Shawn Michaels. Shawn Michaels, to me, is the ultimate scumbag heel. He is just a nauseating human being, I thought, at this point. Not just even though I only knew a little bit about Shawn's antics backstage, just the sight of him made me sick. And it was on an October the 6th Raw, 1997. where he puts the Canadian flag up his nose. Now, if Bret had done this with the American flag, again, I've said this before, the worst thing Bret had done with the American flag during the whole Hart Foundation angle is break it over a turnbuckle, the flag pole. Not the flag itself, never ripped it, never burned it, nothing. But Shawn Michaels stuck my country's flag up his nose. And I know a lot of you out there, oh, well, you just were a snowflake back then, huh? Well, A, if you're American and you say that, well, you're an ignorant moron. B, if you're Canadian and say that, leave the country. Leave the country. So, leading up to Survivor Series, I'm just hoping Bret will win. I am so invested in this. Even though I was so emotionally invested in Hogan and Sting happening long before this, I kind of not forgot about Hogan and Sting, but like I said, I was just watching Halloween Havoc. But I was more invested into this because the personal animosity of it all, which I heard about the backstage fight, that got published in the Toronto Sun. And I knew these two didn't care for each other all that much in real life. I know most of it was supposed to be a work. They, as Bruce Pritchard would say, they worked themselves into a shoot. Bret was mainly trying to make this a work, trying to brew that real life hatred between them, that people really do think they hate each other so they could draw big money with this. So with the rumors of Bret leaving, and again, at this time I didn't know when he handed in the 30-day notice. I guess it was right on November the 1st or late October 31st, something like that. I don't know. But again, there's disputing stories of everywhere from these claims. But obviously it's around that time, clearly. But I'm hoping, like, Bret didn't say right on off the record that he's going to WCW. He said he has given his notice to the WWF. Not once did he bring up WCW, or at least that I recall in that episode. He didn't bring up WCW. Now, that rumor was in the Toronto Sun. It was in the dirt sheets, obviously. That's where the Toronto Sun got a lot of their information. It was from the Observer and the Torch. So I'm thinking to myself, maybe he's just taking some time off. Maybe he just wants to, because I remember him taking time off, obviously, the year prior after losing the Iron Man match. So, I really obviously didn't know the full details of this right at this moment, but I knew something was up. I knew something big was going to happen. I just didn't know how big it would be. But yet, as a fan, keep in mind, I don't know shit about business at this point. Other than the little things I heard from a hotline from my local newspaper or from the stuff in the Toronto Sun that my dad would tell me about. I didn't know shit. So it's not like today where every fan on the internet's like, whoa, well, if this match were to take place, if social media existed heavily like in 1997 like it does now, this story would be all over the internet. And Bret should do the right thing and stuff like people would be all over that. So, anyway. And remember, this podcast is strictly me as a fan. I'll go into more of the behind-the-scenes stuff later from how I perceived it. But so at the time, I'm 14 years old. I'm in high school. It's just started grade 9. We're on a strike. I mentioned this during the Halloween Havoc podcast. So, I still is so nauseated by Shawn that I just so emotionally feeling that Bret needs to kill him. That's the only way this can end. Only way this can end. There's no way Shawn should win this match at all. Now I'm going to backtrack a bit. Back to the Iron Man match at WrestleMania 12. I'll probably do a full podcast on that one day. I was cheering for Bret. But again, even at the age of 13, I knew Shawn was winning that match. I think the whole world knew. And I'm not saying that's a bad way of booking by WWF. On the contrary, WrestleMania is the time where people usually know that the guy is finally going to get the big win, so they pay to see it. Because usually it's been built up so well that you want to pay to see it. Oh, like like even like a few years back, oh, Daniel Bryan's finally gonna have his moment. I gotta tune in and watch this. Kofi Kingston, even just recently, Kofi Kingston last year. Oh, well, I know he's gonna be Daniel Bryan, but I want to see that. That's how WrestleMania usually works, more or less. Same way people, Batista, John Cena's big night. People knew it was going to happen. Even the most casual fan knew it was going to happen. I wouldn't doubt. There were a couple of casual fans that said, "Oh, they're going to win it," but I want to see it. I want to see them win. I want to see JBL lose. I want to see Triple H lose. Yeah, it works. The WrestleMania formula is how it should be. And to me, that was one of the times where that truly was the time where Sean's fans were 110% behind him. I didn't hate Sean at that time. Was I a Bret guy? Yes, but I prepared myself for Bret losing. So I wasn't overly disappointed because here's the thing with loving Bret. I knew he could get it back someday. And he did, twice more. So logically, it didn't bother me. And I still like Sean. Now, as Sean's reign went on, people know historically that's where WCW really took over the Monday Night War. No, that was not Sean's fault. No, I know people like to say, "Oh, blame the champion for everything." Like these modern fans on the internet say, "Oh, it's the champion's fault when things aren't drawing." Yes and no. But Sean's feuds during his title reign were not exactly stellar. I will say his stuff with Diesel was fantastic, including the match itself. Stuff with the Bulldog was crap. Not the matches. Well, okay, I want to beware of Dog again, which that'll definitely be a full podcast, probably coming up in the new year. That match, for different reasons, wasn't all that great, but their match at King of the Ring was really good. But the feud itself and all what it was built on was lame. Shawn and Vader could have been so much more. Wasn't. Match was still great again. The matches weren't the issue. Shawn Michaels could have a good match in a coma with a toothpick. That's how good Shawn Michaels is. I will never, ever dispute that. And I was still liking him. I went to a house show. He wasn't there, mind you. I went to a house show. He was doing a tour in Europe. It was the Warrior, when the Ultimate Warrior made that ill-fated comeback in '96. I had bought the Warrior shirt and the Shawn Michaels shirt. I bought the Shawn Michaels glasses. They were sold out of the hats. So I just, because I didn't know, and then I went to another merch stand. They were still sold out of hats. And I noticed one merch stand had a hat that I hadn't seen before. It was a Bret Hart baseball cap. So my cousin's uncle, who took us at the time, he said, "Well, if you want the Bret Hart hat, I'll grab it for you." I'm like, yeah, grab me the Bret Hart hat, of course. They didn't have any Bret shirts there, obviously. With him being, I guess maybe with him being off, but so I think in Canada, they'd still be selling his merch. I mean, it's not like they sell merch or whatever at house shows. I remember at one house show I went to not that long ago, a few years ago. It was, they had the best selling shirts were Sting, Daniel Bryan, John Cena. Cena wasn't at the show. Sting wasn't at the show. Daniel Bryan was hurt. So there you go. They know what guys sell T-shirts. But anyway, sorry, I digress. I'm veering off topic here. So I was into Sean. In hindsight, me being a 13-year-old wearing heart-shaped glasses is probably why one of the many reasons I got picked on in school. So I really can't. I really got to blame myself for that one. Thank God, maybe that's a blessing to say I didn't get the Shawn Michaels hat, because it was the replica of the hats that he would wear. That's what it was. And I had that Bret Hart cap, which people thought was cool. So then, moving on to the summary, and Sean's feud with Vader, whatever. Match with Mankind was great. Thing is, though, is that WCW was building up their matches immensely with their, you never know what's going to happen next television with the NWO. Sadly, they weren't doing that with the WWF. They did finally have an intriguing feud with Shawn and Sid, Psycho Sid. And Shawn lost the title to him. At this point, this is where I kind of start losing my fandom for Sean. Bret had just come back. There were rumors back then he was going to WCW. I didn't know about them until he made that interview where he said a lot of companies are throwing around a lot of money, and my dad was sitting right there. It was the night he returned on October '96, night after the Buried Alive pay-per-view. My dad said, yeah, he got an offer from WCW. I go, oh. Then, of course, Bret gives that line, I'll be with the WWF forever. So, obviously happy about that. He accepts Stone Cold Steve Austin's challenge, leading to Survivor Series. That's where Shawn loses the title to Sid. That's where Bret has an epic match with Austin. So Bret and Shawn are having a bit of a war of words for the next little while. Shawn inadvertently cost Bret a title match against Sid. Bret and Shawn are kind of getting into it with a war of words. And again, now Shawn, really to WrestleMania 12 was more of a friendly competition between two baby faces. I feel like Shawn's being a jerk from a character standpoint. Shawn is being a jerk. You know, I'm thinking of watching some of these interviews on Raw. I think, why does he just shut up? And this is where I, of course, my fandom for Bret will long overtake Shawn's. Why does he just shut up? He's such an obnoxious jerk where Bret's just telling it like it is. That's what I felt at the time. So, I'm not going to get into the whole lost smile thing, really, all that much of the detail. I thought it was legit at first. I did. I would learn later down the road that it was, well, okay, I can't say it wasn't, sorry, that's wrong. And it might not be. There's many reasons and evidence to point that it might not be, but at the same time, though, I'm not a doctor, and I'm not a lawyer. It's not on trial, so I can't prove it. But anyway, as the tension keeps rising between the two, Bret, of course, turns, forms the Hart Foundation. Even me, I'll admit this, that I felt Bret was kind of being a bit of a whiner. Even though I still liked him over Shawn in this whole issue, I still felt Bret was kind of whining a little too much for someone who I've idolized for years. I was enjoying his pro-Canadian speech on Raw the night after WrestleMania 13, but at the same time, though, still felt he was whining a little too much. And then, as time went on, I'm thinking, you know what? Yeah, that's right. Why are these Americans looking up to Shawn Michaels? Why are these Americans looking up to Stone Cold Steve Austin or The Undertaker? Granted, I still love The Undertaker, but still, Bret's been leading the pack and being a good role model for them for years. And again, as a fan, this is how I felt at the time. Canadian Stampede was an epic moment. Now, I'd heard about the backstage fight shortly before this. I knew that they kind of alluded to it on Raw. And I found out the details later. Again, it was in the Toronto Sun. And of course, me being me, Bret would have whipped Shawn's ass. Lucky that's all he escaped with was a clump of hair out. That whole thing, right? Like, so this is where I really started to have my disdain for Shawn. Oh, I forgot to mention this. Long before he put the Canadian flag up his nose, the Raw in Halifax, the night of the flag match, he stuffed mini Canadian flags down his pants. That was the moment. Not when he turned after SummerSlam, not when he formed DX. It was that moment there where I said, fuck you, Shawn Michaels. Because again, if Bret Hart were to do something like that to the American flag, well, there'd be calling for his head. He would not leave an arena alive. Oh, maybe you Canadians should have done something to Shawn. Nah, because, that would just make us monsters. And just made Shawn look like more of a disgusting human being. That's how I was feeling at the time anyway. I don't think there was any, at least I'm hoping there was no malice out of it. I know Shawn's probably just trying to get heat. I understand that. But I've always been uneasy about bringing any country's flag into it. Any country's flag. So, and yes, that includes my friends in America. Nobody should be desecrating your flag either. Nobody should be Like, and I'm talking just wrestling here even. No, I would, if Bret Hart had done that, because I've always been taught that that's not right as a kid. If Bret Hart had done that, I would have lost a lot of respect for him. A lot. So anyway, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little heated here. Now, back to where we began. The week leading up to the show, and Bret appearing on TV. Also, at this time, he's really openly critical of the WWE's current product. From a moral standpoint, I can understand where Bret's coming from. Even at 14, I knew what morals and values were. Bret felt that wrestling should be a certain way and not that way. He's not the only wrestler who thinks wrestling should be a certain way, even whether he's wrong or right. I actually disagreed with Bret here. Here's why. I'm 14 years old. They're heading in the direction of the Attitude Era. It's being geared towards people like me, teenagers who want to see the crazy shit. Seeing Stone Cold stun Vince McMahon, seeing hardcore matches, watching Mick Foley go like do some crazy shit, watching Sable 99% naked. It may sound bad, but yes, as a 14-year-old just starting high school, I wasn't the only one. I was the only one in my school. I was the only one in my town. I wasn't the only one in the whole of North America or around the world. Every teenager who watched wrestling that was my age or older enjoyed that shit. In hindsight now, as I'm 37, a lot of it has not aged well. I can see why a lot of it wouldn't fly today. That's why there'll never be another Attitude Era, because I just feel, and yes, we can talk about the sensitive culture that's out there today. That's part of it. But some stuff just isn't made for 2020. Bottom line. But anyway, so we're still off of school in the week leading up to the show. The school strike that I mentioned on the Halloween Havoc episode is still going on. I watched Raw, November the 3rd, the go-home show, if you will, to the Survivor Series. I remember at this time thinking, Stone Cold Steve Austin, as much as I hated him, I had a love-hate thing for him. When he wasn't feuding with the Hart Foundation, I loved him. But mind you, that was 99.9999% of the time. So the other 0.1, like when he's signing Vince, I like him. But in all seriousness, though, Stone Cold, despite the fact that he's feuding with Owen Hart, who I also loved at that time, you know, I just can't help but like the guy now. I've resisted liking him for so long, it was just impossible. I mentioned that angle that they did with the Nation of Domination. Bret Hart had legitimately hated that. He hated being portrayed as a racist on television. And it does cross a certain line. Oh, but that's just oversensitive society. No, I really don't think. That just goes to show you, Bret Hart has his personal faults. They're very well documented, even in his own book. But it just goes to show you the type of character he has in that regard in terms of how he feels about different races. You know, he's had friends of many ethnicities in professional wrestling. So clearly, even though I'm sure that Ron Simmons, Farouk, and the rest of the nation, you know, they knew that Bret wasn't really a racist, most likely. But still, I could see why, because fans take it seriously, why Bret didn't like that whole story. I have to wonder what the payoff would have been for that. Like, it wasn't, okay, I'll say this. It wasn't a bad storyline in theory that way. It was definitely something to make things stand out and get people talking, yes, which is a big goal in wrestling. At the same time, though, they really could have scaled it back to it was just slightly crossing that line. Some of the remarks that were being spray painted in the Nation's locker room That clearly was DX framing them. We all knew that. Come on. I mean, I think if they just scaled it back just a little bit, maybe it might have worked. Maybe. But again, there would never been a payoff either way for obvious reasons. Spoiler, I'm sure you all know what happens. I remember on that November 3rd Raw, though, they had, I remember because they were leading up to Jeff Jarrett returning to the ring. Couldn't care less. Sorry. No. I have an appreciation for Jarrett now as I'm older. I learned to appreciate him as I've gotten older and how good he really is. But back then, I just didn't care. And it wasn't just because he was a bad guy. I just did not care. Like, whoop-de-doo, he's back. Okay. And he's shooting on WCW. And yeah, well, I didn't enjoy him in WCW at that point either. So there's a lot of crazy things happening. Vince is trying new things. Some of them are working, some are not, but that's wrestling. By this point, I knew Vince was the owner. It had already been talked about a few times on Raw, even while he was still doing his commentary gig. This would be the last episode of Raw he would do prior to Survivor Series. This would be the last time he'd be the head play-by-play man, ever. And they showed this beautiful hype video of Bret and Shawn. Really capturing the hatred and animosity the two have for each other, both real and fictional. It was great. It got me all the more excited. I'm saying to myself, Bret has to win. He can't lose. Now, the whole theme of Survivor Series at this point, and it was, again, this was heavily built up to, was the gang wars. There were several factions at this point. You people think AEW has too many factions right now or whatever, or rely too heavily on it. WWF in 1997, you had, in addition to the Hart Foundation, you had DX, obviously. You had the actual gang groups as they were labeled as. Los Boricuas, a Puerto Rican-based group led by Savio Vega. Disciples of Apocalypse, DOA, led by Crush, Ryan Adams, as well as Brian Lee was there, and those alleged racist scum fucks, the Harris brothers, alleged. I don't know for sure. I've seen them wear some borderline racial clothing, and they've had there's been rumors about them, so I don't know. That's why I say allegedly. Then you had the Truth Commission, which was led by Don Callis, the Jackal. Don Callis, of course, now many of you know, as one of the voices of Impact Wrestling. A very brilliant man, I think. And, of course, the mainstay in that group, or the main attraction in that group, if there was one, was Kurgan, the Interrogator. They call him a giant of a wrestler, later best known for his run in the Oddities. And you had the Nation. And, of course, a lot of you know that, led by Farouk. The Rock was really coming up at this point. Really starting to catch fire as a heel. That's a lot of factions right there. By my count, that's 6. 6 factions. And again, some of you guys out there think AEW is bad. The gang wars, to me, did not do it for me. No, I mean, simply just speaking, watching the show every week, I didn't mind DOA, I guess, if I had known certain things about the Harris brothers, and I allegedly seem to hear now. I liked Crush. I liked Brian Adams. For some reason, I mean, he was hit or miss with me. Sometimes I liked certain things he did, sometimes I didn't. He was the wrestler I always flip-flopped on. So I didn't mind them. The Boricuas, I like Savio Vega. Even back then, even as a heel, I enjoyed him. I don't know, for whatever reason, I was Savio Vega. Can't explain why, but I did. But in hindsight, I realized how smart he really was. And still is. Maybe that's why I liked him all along, because I knew he was just a smart guy, and subconsciously. The Truth Commission did nothing for me. Didn't care about them. The Nation, hated them. And no, don't go there, people. Don't get offended. I hated them because they were heels. But I did like Farouk when he was Ron Simmons in WCW. I actually liked him a lot. So As I am getting prepared for this show, the only match I'm really looking forward to, even though it's the only match that people remember, is Bret and Shawn. And leading up to it, I remember thinking the rumors are we're going back to school the following weekend. And that weekend, a certain movie came out. What was supposed to be a big box office, it actually ended up being a cult favorite. Not quite big at the box office. Starship Troopers came out that weekend. Titanic was on its way to theaters a month from this. So this is the kind of the time we're living in. The Spice Girls are huge. This is the world I know. No, I'm not quoting Collective Soul. But it truly is. This is the world around me. It was a very interesting time to live. And I will say this, living in 2020 like I have, which has been hard for everybody, almost literally everyone in the world, it has been hard for. Whether you have COVID, whether you didn't, whether you lost a loved one to it, it's affected us in one way or many ways. I'm opening up a bit here, but it makes me long for those days. I don't want to go back to being 14. I wouldn't mind being 37 back in 1997 because it was just such an interesting time to live. Detroit Red Wings just ended their 42-year Stanley Cup drought. That tragic accident of Vladimir Konstantinov. Terrible, but I remember the story that made the Red Wings rally in honor of their fallen teammate as well as one of their trainers. It was a beautiful story. Tragic for Konstantinov, but a beautiful story the way it ended the following year in terms of winning it all for him, pretty much. It was a time where the Florida Marlins shocked the Cleveland Indians, the Cleveland's famous collapse in the World Series. Everybody thought finally the years of heartache were over for Cleveland, and I was torn. Again, it was literally just before this. It's around the same time with the Halloween Havoc and all that. I like the Marlins a lot because I like the Marlins in Cleveland for the same reasons. They had former Expos players. Moises Alou was on the Florida Marlins, and Marquise Grissom was on the Indians. Next to Larry Walker, these guys are my favorite Expos. Larry Walker was now in Colorado. And he had won MVP that year, oddly enough. So he'd won MVP. Two of my other favorite Expos were in the World Series. So I was good with either team. I was kind of leaning towards the Marlins a bit because I just thought it would be a great story of an expansion team winning, not really truly understanding the heartache that poor fans in Cleveland went through at this point. And Grissom was a beast in those playoffs, man. Was he ever. So the Marlins won that thrilling series. What a time. What a time. And it's one of the reasons I started doing this podcast is because those times were just so much simpler. Yeah, sure, it's because I was a kid. At the same time, though, I wish times could be that simple again, even for everyone in the world right now. So, the weekend before of the show, there's been arrangements made for myself, many of my cousins, specifically my cousin Jamie, Wayne, Corey. I think most of us actually went out to Brantford to see my Aunt Rose. Her and my uncle had split up at that point. They had just recently split up. And the arrangements were made for us to go out there with her. My uncle was trying to, keep that olive branch extended. He actually is the one who drove us out there. I mean, he was always good to us that way, I don't doubt a part of him didn't want to drive us out there to his ex-wife's, soon-to-be ex-wife's house or new apartment in Brantford. It was a very large apartment, I think 4 bedrooms. And we had a great day. We had a great weekend. We went up early on the Saturday. My uncle stayed there and actually played football with us for a bit, which was always fun. I remember as we're settling down to eat, my cousin Mike says, "So you're watching Survivor Series tomorrow, right?" I said, "Well, yeah, of course. I wouldn't miss that for the world." He's like, "Oh, you're so lucky. I want to see Bret beat Sean." Then Jamie, yeah, Jamie's a year older than me, chimes in and says, "Oh, yeah, I hate Shawn Michaels. He's such a fucking pansy." I think he said effing because he's trying to censor his language around my aunt. Such an effing pansy. And I agreed. So I am anxious for this, to the point where I'm having fun with my cousins, but I can't wait for tomorrow to come. I remember we were talking about it. We even watched. We're supposed to be in bed. We snuck it because we were all in different rooms. We snuck into the one room where we all watched Shotgun Saturday Night to get that last bit of build up. And like going on, "Oh, you're so lucky you get to watch that, man. I wish I could watch that." And I had a lot of pay-per-view gatherings, as I've mentioned in previous podcasts, but usually through the school year was a bit harder, especially with my cousin Mike, especially him and Corey both. They were only 9 at that point. So they were obviously in bed before the pay-per-views were even over, before the main event was probably even on. They were over a lot in the summers, or whenever they just happened to be at school the next day after a pay-per-view. But as they got a little older, they started coming to more and more and more. So also, Jamie didn't always make it to every one. Sometimes he would watch them elsewhere. And Wayne, as he got a little older, started coming out to more pay-per-views. I talked a lot about my cousin Wayne and the Breakdown podcast. You can out in the archives. So the next day, I wake up, and again, I'm driving home. My aunt's driving us back. And they're telling me, "Oh, you got to tell us all about it. You gotta, when you see us, you gotta talk to us about it. Tell us about the match." I'm like, "Yeah, absolutely." Because I always did stuff like that. Always did stuff like that. So I get home. My parents, I remember my mom made a really nice dinner. Really nice dinner. It was pork chops and rice. And then they told me they're going to see Starship Troopers. So, of course, I'd be watching the pay-per-view by myself. And I was excited. Downright excited. Now, as it started, I was like, I already got my Diet Coke, got my chips. I just want to see Bret and Sean. Again, I look forward to main events a lot, obviously, more than most matches on shows sometimes. Still do, depending on the event itself. But this was one of the shows I was only looking forward to that match because, to be honest, they hadn't really announced a lot of matches outside of Bret and Sean, as well as the elimination match with the Hart Foundation versus Team USA and Stone Cold versus Owen Hart, which is Stone Cold's return to the ring after the terrible accident he suffered in August at SummerSlam, again, SummerSlam 97 in the archives. So I just wanted them to get on with it. Like, come on. I spent the last night in Brantford having fun with my cousins the night prior, watching the embarrassing Toronto Maple Leafs squad lose to the Phoenix Coyotes. All while thinking, "Oh, can't Survivor Series just get here already?" But be that as it may, I was still trying to get interested into the show. Throughout the show, Jim Ross is pointing out this is Bret's last match. This might be Bret's last match in the WWF. Something, oh no. I'm thinking that right now. I got that feeling of dread coming over me. Little did I know how that dread would pay off, obviously. There's, of course, that memorable interview with Vince McMahon where Michael Cole interviews him backstage. Who's going to win? Vince. I don't know. Now, the show itself, when I was like watching some of these matches, the elimination matches, I didn't care. Just as a fan, they were doing, again, nothing for me. The Godwins and the New Age Outlaws, I don't think they were even called the Outlaws yet. They were just Billy Gunn and Road Dogg. And I thought, well, they're finally showing some personality that Billy hadn't shown since the Smoking Gun split up, and Road Dogg had shown, well, ever. The Godwins, who I thought were great bad guys, great heels, took on the Headbangers and the Blackjacks. The Headbangers warmed up to me. The new Blackjacks did not care. So I was bored for this match. I was just kind of, if I got too bored, I would sometimes start drawing or start writing. And then there was the Truth Commission versus DOA. Same thing, didn't care. Then I really got into the one with Team Canada and Team USA. Goldust on the Raw, Go Home Raw, there's an interview, pre-recorded interview where he dumps Terry Runnels, or Marlena, as she's known then, and ends their marriage, more or less. So he's on the verge of a heel turn here. Mark Merrow is potentially heel at this point as well, with him berating Sable all the time. And of course, the match ends when Goldust kind of walks out on Vader. Goldust had an injury at the time, legitimately, I believe. And Bulldog is the survivor of the match. The crowd was hot for this. The crowd was hot for the whole Hart Foundation issue. So I'm actually getting more to the show than I thought I would. The Kane and Mankind stuff, I thought Kane was a beast. I was really, really into the stuff with him and The Undertaker. The Undertaker had only appeared on TV once since Bad Blood, and that was to say, they built it up so well. Like, what's The Undertaker's response going to be? And he was on TV for a few weeks. I will never fight my own flesh and blood. And I'm like, oh, come on. And that was the goal, right? You wanted to see him fight him. But Taker was also, I didn't know this at the time, but in Japan, having a really good match with Jinsei Shinzaki, better known as North American audiences as Hakushi. And no, I didn't sneeze. The Nation match against, like, Davis Nation versus LOD, Ahmed Johnson and Ken Shamrock, I was kind of into that. I liked a lot of the guys involved there, so I was happy to see Shamrock. When I was really into Shamrock, actually, at this point, too. Austin beats Owen. Again, even though I loved Owen, I knew that was coming. No surprise. All that was out of the way. Even though I got into some of the show more than I thought I would, finally, it's here. It's here. Remember, I ran to the fridge quick. Thankfully, the fridge was just around the corner from the TV. Grabbed another Diet Coke. Cracked it open. I'm ready for this. Shawn Michaels walking into the back with DX, Triple H, Chyna, Rick Rude at the time. They're walking out and thinking, I hope you get your pretty little face punched in. Hope Bret knocks your teeth so far down your throat, the next words you say will be muffled by your own ass. Shawn comes out. He's getting stuff thrown at him. Pretty vile heat for him. And what does he do? He humps the Canadian flag in the ring. And I am like, fuck you. You piece of shit. I want Bret to kick his ass more. So his goal, he got his goal. Like, he had me in the palm of his hand, like he had that whole crowd. Again, I know he's only trying to get heat, but still. This was around the time where Canadian patriotism was heavily relied on from sports. I know it's ridiculous in a lot of ways, but in a lot of ways it makes sense too. Donovan Bailey, just fresh off of beating Michael Johnson in a one-on-one race, proving he was a better man because Johnson quit like a pansy. Yep, I'll always say that. Sorry to my American listeners, but he did. Donovan Bailey beat him, proving he was better. And that was like, we were sky high on that. Again, we found out that we're going to the Olympics. The NHL players are going to the Olympics. The sports patriotism, I'll throw wrestling in there. Sports patriotism was at a sky high. People were very proud to be Canadian. People still are. I'm not saying they aren't, but I'm just saying there's a way about it at that point. It was kind of hard to explain. I didn't really explain it too well, but I tried. Give me a break. Then Bret, there's Bret. His son, who I'd seen like many magazine articles in that from WWE magazine, carrying the flag, following Dad. Hart Foundation, some members of the Hart Foundation with Bret. Bret's music hits. I get a chill. I know something's happening here. What? I have no idea. Something's happening. I get a chill. Again, what JR has been saying all night on commentary. And I also noticed Vince wasn't there, oddly enough. It gave me a chill because it might be the last time I'm going to hear it. That was in the back of my mind. My favorite wrestler, much like my favorite hockey player, was going to somewhere that wasn't my favorite team. I would still follow him. Bret marches out. I noticed there's some booze in the crowd. In hindsight, I feel maybe it had leaked out he was leaving because there were some signs in the crowd kind of pointing towards that. So maybe they resented him for that. Maybe some people just didn't like him. Probably a little bit of both. I'd say it was about, 80-20. 20 still very vocal, but again, the crowd was loving Bret still. The tense atmosphere that in my lifetime at this point I'd never seen in a match. I would think that in my lifetime, the only thing that would come close in terms of just the tension, which I was watching, but not as religiously as I was at this point, obviously, and also because I didn't get pay-per-view back then, but Macho and Hogan. There's such tension there. Hulk and Andre obviously goes without saying. But at least I remember a bit of Hulk and Macho a bit more. I felt this had more tension than Hogan and Sting currently had going in WCW. This was it. This was it. So that big brawl begins the match. And I am hanging on every single second. I'm not taking my eyes off the screen. Even my cat at the time, and I miss poor little Casper. She was trying to jump on my lap. I'm like, I don't realize she's different. I'm just kind of petting her without even looking at her. And then I'm just kind of like not brushing her away, just kind of like saying, okay, I'm a little into this. She tried to sit on my lap, and I'm like moving my legs so much, like, because I do that sometimes when I'm really into, nervous or like, my heart's racing. If my heart was racing in this match, it was. And every moment, because I don't know what's going to happen. Now, these guys, to no surprise, are having a really good match. And again, if it weren't for what's about to happen, it would have been just another great match between these two, which, again, it's like, both in their comas with each other. They could have wrestled each other in their comas and had a 4-star match at the very least. They're having a fantastic match here. Even back then, I hadn't realized it. So then, as it's going on, I notice Vince is at ringside and that, but a lot of the officials are because I understand it's to really capture give that big match feel where these two are just out of control to the point where all these officials have to be at ringside, including the man himself, Vince. Like I said, I knew he was the owner at this point already. I'd known maybe in about the last year or so. So I didn't think it was out of place. I had that thought earlier. Why isn't Vince on commentary tonight? Then I see him out here, and I thought, oh, okay. Yeah, that's all I thought. Oh, okay. Makes perfect sense. They're really kicking things into high gear because the actual match itself doesn't get started until several minutes in, like the actual bell ringing. And they tell a great story here. Obviously, Bret is, again, being in Montreal, and I'd say in the feud itself is the face. In the Raws leading up to this, Bret was getting a few more cheers, even though he tried to say, "Don't cheer me." But he did. And Shawn was the asshole in this whole scenario. But Bret was really bringing that babyface fire that he was known for so many years in this match, more than he ever had during this entire run. Even though he was a face in Canada, he wasn't the Bret that we knew. And I'm not saying it's a criticism. Bret was still having matches that were blowing like the rest of the show out of the water at this point still. He had to change things up, obviously, due to his character change, but again, he was still one of the best. Then came that big moment. Earl Hebner takes a ref bump, gets knocked out. I'm thinking, oh my God. Oh no. And I'm thinking, right away, I'm thinking, oh, DX is going to come down or something. But then I see Shawn put on the sharpshooter. I'm like, oh, you asshole. Like, fuck you. What are you doing? Like, what a slap in the face. Puts the sharpshooter on. I'm thinking, okay, the Hart Foundation is going to come out. Come on. Hart Foundation is going to come. Where are they? Where are they? I see Earl slowly get up. I also see Bret going for the leg to try to reverse it. To be clear, I don't hear Vince on the camera, audibly at all, or on the TV, I mean. Say, ring the bell, or ring the effing bell. Again, different accounts of what was actually said. The bell rang. I'm like, no, what? No, he didn't submit. What? No. What? I had an empty can of Diet Coke that I had a little bit left in it. I tossed it across the room. Like, no. No. I couldn't believe it. Then I see Bret get up. Well, you couldn't see it completely on the angle during the broadcast of the pay-per-view. I saw Bret spit, and I knew it was at Vince. I am completely confused. Shawn looks like he's confused. He's raising the belt in the air. I see the logo come out where the show about to go. They're like, no, no, no. What the hell just happened? I couldn't make sense of any of it. I was sitting there trying to put it together in my head. Why would Bret spin at Vince? Did Vince ring the bell? But I saw Earl get up. I was so confused. So, moments later, literally like 3 minutes after the show's out there, and I'm trying to figure out what the hell went on. My dad walks in. Of course, me being me, run upstairs, a mile a minute. He has to tell me to slow down. Tell him what happened. He's confused. He's like, even he said, that doesn't make sense. So that's what happened. So you're telling me, and then he like repeats it. You're telling me that Bret was in the sharpshooter and the bell just suddenly rang and the referee was, Bret didn't submit or whatever. And he's like, you're telling me then he spit on Vince McMahon? Like, yes. I may have been a creative kid, but I'm not that creative at that point to concoct something like that. Yeah. So he couldn't make sense of it either. So, of course, that combined with the bad news, I was going back to school the next day. Yes, I forgot to mention that just as the pay-per-view was starting, I got a phone call from my grandmother who was looking for my mom. She's at a movie. She's like, yeah, you guys did settle away. That school's settled. I'm like, oh, yay. But of course, I'm actually kind of anxious to get to school because I'm going to bed that night. Still trying to figure out what the hell went wrong. But eager to get to sleep because I want to talk to my friends about this the next day. I've seen John, but that's about it. So I run to his locker. I'm like, John. He's like, what? Wait, did John hear what happened to Survivor Series last night? He's like, no, what? I explained to him the whole thing. I'm like, Bret, I think Bret Hart got, and I actually said these words. I think he got screwed out of the title. He's like, huh? I'm like, he was in his sharpshooter. Sean put him in the sharpshooter. He looked like he was about to reverse it. The bell rang. Then he spit on Vince McMahon. It's like, what? Like, yeah. Now, in the back of my head, I'm thinking, storyline. Same time, I know the rumors of Bret going to WCW are there. I know he gave his notice, like he said off the record. I'm hoping this was a way to write him off TV. So that's what I knew, because I knew they did that. They write wrestlers off. Maybe if he ever comes back, he'll go for revenge on Sean. Or maybe he'll just be at Raw. I was hoping he'll be at Raw. Every wrestling fan in the school, even the ones that I didn't get along with that used to pick on me, were talking to me about this the whole day. I remember first period Matt, this guy Jay, looked at me and said, hey, I heard something crazy happened at Survivor Series last night. I'm like, yeah. And I explain the whole thing to him. And then right away somebody saying, oh, it's because he's going to WCW. He's definitely going to WCW. I'm like, no, he can't be going to WCW. I'm hoping not. Then there's, again, all day. So his first day back at school was typical, whatever. I didn't like school. Ran home, which was stupid because it's not going to make Raw start any faster. If anything, I had to wait longer at my house. And I asked my dad, I said, did you read the Toronto Sun at all today? Because I think he used to get it at work. He said, no, I didn't get it today. I was like, why? I'm like, well, I was trying to see if they figured out what happened to Bret Hart. He's like, oh, he's probably going to WCW, like I told you. I'm like, yeah, that's a weird way for him to lose the title. And then my dad said, well, maybe it was real. I'm like, no way. Now, again, we didn't get Raw live. Raw was on at midnight, so I had to wait even longer. I'd usually watch it Tuesdays at 4. That was, again, I mentioned this on previous podcasts too, but I was staying up this night. I don't care if I was going to be tired for school the next day. Now, what I always did, though, however, was I programmed, because I had a VCR in my room that programmed a tape show when I wanted a show taped, because I had a habit of falling asleep. I fell asleep at literally like 10 to midnight. Because I remember I looked at my clock, it was like 11:48. I fell asleep. TV was still on. I woke up at like 3:30 a.m. Of course, Raw was long over at this point. At some point, I'm like, damn it. Then as I got up, I went to go to the washroom. I came back. I just wanted to at least see. This is a habit I have. That if something took place, I have to see if I at least have access to it. I rewound the tape. It taped, thankfully, because sometimes I had a habit of not taping. It did, so I knew I was going to watch it the next day. So I actually woke up at around, like I usually do for the next day for school, around a little after 7 or so. And I told my mom I'm not, I usually just watch whatever's on TV in the morning. I took the tape downstairs, the downstairs VCR, popped it in, and started watching. I knew I was going to get through all of it, so I watched the beginning of Raw. Raw was in Ottawa, and DX's music hits. This is the first time, so I'm like, what the hell is this? And then, of course, the break it down, and you see the DX on the Titantron, like, oh. Like, yeah, fuck these guys. There's Sean coming out all smug. Cuts that infamous scathing promo on Bret, ran him down south with the rest of the dinosaurs. They're trying to begin a feud with him and Ken Shamrock at this point, which, and again, I have to go to school, but I want to keep watching, hoping Bret's going to pop up somewhere. But as I'm noticing, there's none of the Hart Foundation at Raw. I'm like, this is strange. This is completely strange. So, of course, I stop the tape, come home for lunch, watch a little bit more, still don't finish it. Like, damn it. Finally get home from school, watch the rest of it. It's a very surreal episode, the way the crowd's reacting. No Bret. That is when it hit me. He's gone. He's gone. My favorite wrestler, my idol at this point, gone. It was heartbreaking. It really was. It really was. I took a lot of that stuff to heart back then. Maybe that's pathetic. Perhaps it is, but it sucked for me as a fan, and it sucked. And I know there's a lot of you out there that can relate to that emotional investment you have in a certain wrestler, that if his career ends or he leaves the company that you love so much. I'm sure people have felt that way about Hogan when he left the WWF. I don't doubt that. I don't doubt that people in New York, after Bruno retired, felt something. And no, not just New York, but I mean the whole, that Northeast, stronghold for the WWF. I'm sure that they felt something when Bruno. I know WCW felt it. WCW fans felt it when Flair left in 91. He was that company. I felt like Bret was a WWF guy through and through. And again, I'm thinking, I'm still in the back of my head, maybe he is going to WCW. It kind of occurred to me. Maybe he is. Or maybe he's just gone from wrestling. He was 40. I knew he was 40. I knew everything about Bret. He's 40 years old. He's always had said in even interviews long before it was revealed in other documentaries or interviews he's done since, he didn't want to stick around too long. Like he felt like guys like Hogan and them were doing. So maybe he's done. But again, I'm thinking, is this still a story? Is it not? Like, I'm still confused by all this. Then the Wednesday, Nitro airs on TSN at 4 p.m. And I get home from school, I think, okay, maybe Bret will be on Nitro. Then what happens? The NWO comes out, flanked in Canadian flags. I knew right away. Like, Bret's coming to WCW. Yep, that was the 110% confirmation. They did that awful version of O Canada. To their credit, they put Bret over verbally. Made it look like a big deal, even though it was the NWO doing it. They were starting that angle, Bret's coming to join them, the NWO. I actually thought that was cool, because I like the NWO. And that keeps me further thinking, maybe it was real. Or maybe not. Maybe that's just the way they wanted to get rid of him. Because I knew, even back then, I know he can't take the title with him. I knew that Medusa, Alundra Blaze, she had done it a couple years prior. That was the women's title. This was the World Wrestling Federation Championship. To me, that's sacred as a wrestling fan. Nothing against Medusa or Alundra Blaze. I was a fan of hers. But even at my most naive, I knew that Vince McMahon and the World Wrestling Federation wouldn't let their own title, their main title, be on another show. I just knew it. So then later that weekend, finally comes out. My dad tells me, reads in the Toronto Sun. He actually brought home the paper for me. He said, yeah, there it is. It was real. I'm like, what? Bret Hart did not want to lose to Shawn Michaels. There was a dispute about it, and he refused to lose to him, and that's how they got the title off of him. And of course, first thing I think, I'm like, sons of bitches. How dare you screw my hero? I was pissed. And more than ever did I just couldn't stand the sight of Shawn Michaels. I actually did not watch Raw. I watched the following week. I didn't watch the next couple of Raws leading up to D-Generation X. I would see some of the highlights. Like, I wasn't boycotting WWF. I just had no desire to watch Raw at this point. I was just so angry. I didn't hate the WWF because me being the wrestling fan I am at this point, I can't stay away. I watched the recap shows on the weekends, see what was happening. I was loving the stuff with Stone Cold and The Rock. That was truly beginning at this point. The Rock stealing the Intercontinental title, all that great stuff. My dad had even noticed that I wasn't watching Raw. And he said, "Do you even want to watch the pay-per-view? The In Your House D-Generation X pay-per-view?" I said, "Well, yeah, I'll still watch the pay-per-view." So I'm learning things slowly as they're coming out. Bret finally appears on Off the Record, and of course, I'm glued to the television. And he gives not the full details we'd later learn, but a good chunk of them, at least from his side. And then I saw the clip, not that long, around the same time of the Bret Screwed Bret interview. I'm like, you know what, Vince? Stick it up your ass. Like, who are you trying to convince here? My dad brings home another article from the Toronto Sun saying, apparently Shawn Michaels is a real asshole in real life. When he told me that, I was not surprised, because I had heard little things. So apparently he pulls all this crap backstage. So, of course, I'm on Bret's side right away. Yeah, I was biased at that point, won't lie. Even though I knew that Vince wouldn't let his title go to another company. At the same time, though, knowing the hatred that Bret and Shawn had for one another, I'm thinking, Bret's totally on the right. I was excited to see Bret appear on Nitro. But before that, because he hadn't appeared yet, I watched the In Your House D-Generation X pay-per-view, which, I recommend you avoid that one. Michael Shamrock main event, whatever. Michaels keeps his title, doesn't win the match, gets disqualified. Triple H interferes. Everyone saw that one going a mile away. And I'm just like, whatever. So I'm already ready to change the channel. Like, okay, and just start getting ready for bed. And suddenly, out of nowhere, Owen Hart. I'm like, yes. I started screaming, Owen, yes. And I'm loving this. That woke me up from my WWF lull in the last month. That woke me up. It's like I was falling asleep on the WWF, and that woke me back up big time. And the Austin Rock stuff too. I'll admit, okay, that was a highlight of the show too. I was enjoying that, but still, I felt with Bret gone, a piece of my fandom was gone too. Spoiler: that wouldn't last. Much as I love Bret, what the WWF would be doing on the coming months and years, well, couldn't help but love it. I'll cover Starrcade 97 in long form. Probably next month I'll cover that. Bret and WCW, didn't work out. So the whole year, even though Bret's appearances on Off the Record where he's explained a lot of what's happened, Vince did the Bret Screwed Bret thing. I hated Vince for so much after that. The rest, as they say, is history, but a year later, Wrestling with Shadows comes out. Watch it if you haven't seen it, folks. Whether you like Bret or not, whether you side with him or not, it is a good watch. It's a really good watch. Not only does it emphasize on the screw job, obviously, but it actually really captures Bret in a big way, who he is. So I watched this special. It was on, I didn't watch the A&E airing. I think I remember watching it on TVO. I remember TVO aired it here in Ontario. And I hated Shawn even more. I knew Shawn was out of wrestling because of a back injury. I hated Vince even more after this. So I'm thinking, and I said to my cousins, good, glad that Shawn's gone. I wouldn't say that now. I would say a lot of things I'm saying here on this podcast right now. But yeah, that's it. Now, look, we can go over the details, blue in the face of who's right, who's wrong. At that time, that's what I was feeling as a fan. I'll tell you what I feel now, though, because I'm still a fan, obviously. I wouldn't be doing this podcast. Bret Hart is still my all-time favorite wrestler. I've learned to appreciate Shawn Michaels, especially after his comeback. Because as I got older, as I learned more things, I realized Bret wasn't right about everything. Because I know a lot of you know me, that burning question. Bill, you're the biggest Bret Hart fan I know. I'm not saying I am the biggest Bret Hart fan in the world. There's probably more diehards in Germany that love him more than I do, even. But this is what people have asked me. Did Vince screw Bret? My answer? No. Bill, did Bret screw Bret? My answer? No. Shawn didn't screw Bret. Earl didn't screw Bret. Hunter? Briscoe? No. Russo? Cornette? Even though some have said, let's screw him. Vince McMahon did what he had to do. On the other side of the coin, as many people who work close to Vince, mainly Jim Cornette, have said, Cornette was on the creative team at that time, and of course was later revealed he was one of the ones that allegedly tried to come up with this scenario, referencing an old Montreal Screwjob from many moons ago. That why was Bret still the champion, even if Vince knew he was going to let him go? Especially after knowing what happened with Medusa. Still pretty fresh in his mind. That's another scenario. Maybe Vince let it get to a point he shouldn't have. I can believe that too. But at the same time, though, even despite that being the case, he still had to do what was right for his company, even if he had been a little careless with the situation. That can be debated forever. On Bret's end, Bret, people often they're right when they say it, they're only half right. The whole not wanting the job in Canada. That it's not as cut and dry in that, and Bret has said this on many occasions for the past 23 years. There's an interaction between him and Shawn backstage at a show where Bret even said, I'll put you over if that's the direction Vince is headed. And Shawn outright said, I just hope you know I'm not willing to do the same for you. Keep in mind, Bret hadn't officially given his notice at this point. As far as he knew, he could probably still stay with the company. Or was hoping to. Bret was hoping to stay. So that angered Bret. The losing in Canada thing was, yes, emphasizing wrestling with shadows. Bret was willing to do business in a different way, but sadly, him being a little too old school for his own good may have gotten the better of him. But I can see why Bret didn't want to lose to Shawn. I can see why he wanted there's several scenarios that he wanted to play out. Maybe he'll lose to Shawn if he goes over at Survivor Series and they can put him over, on Raw or on a house show at Madison Square Garden or something. And everybody went back and forth. Again, you know the story. Bret had his reasons, but much like Vince, Bret put himself in a scenario where he probably shouldn't have been in. Cooler heads couldn't prevail, especially with him and Shawn's real-life hatred of one another. And it led to him suffering a pretty humiliating moment. Shawn. Again, Shawn, despite his attitude at this time, and I feel a little sympathy for him in this scenario, obviously, but At the same time, I don't envy his situation either. I can't, if I'm in Sean's brain in 1997, which obviously it's impossible. If you go upon what you've heard about him, what he himself has admitted, maybe his hatred for Bret made him so stubborn as well. And again, that's why it was literally impossible for these guys to get on the same page. Then, of course, there's Earl. Earl's probably the one I feel sorry for more than any of them. He actually, no, scratch that. He is the one I feel sorry for the most out of any of them. He was put in an impossible situation. I feel so bad that he had to go through that. I'm sure it aided him. There you go. Triple H, well, I'll say this. When I've read about Triple H back at that time, again, I have respect for him now. At that time, he was a worm, in my opinion. He just kind of, like the stories you hear and from everyone around that, not everyone, but people around that time, certain people, he was a worm. He was a worm. And no, this is long before he married Stephanie. This is long before he even started dating her. So this, no. And I'm not even one of those guys that thinks, oh, he married into the business, that deal. He did, but not the way people did. You know what I mean? It's not that quite cut and dry, you know. Again, hearing those early stories about him, he's just kind of a little sniveling worm, it seems. A snake. So for in that whole scenario, I'm like, yeah, fuck him. Again, people taking credit for it, Briscoe, Russo. I don't think Briscoe's taking credit. I just keep hearing he was in on it. Russo has taken credit. Cornette has taken credit. Well, a few others say it was, all these people were involved. Hunter was involved. He came up with the idea too. Kind of alluded to that on one of Sean's DVDs. If he's not going to do business, we'll do it for him. I don't know. I think it's a combination of everyone. I think it's just a combination of everyone. But again, what it comes down to is one man. The McMahon. Vince McMahon. So to me, it's not as simple as one person in the scenario being 110% wrong or even 110% right. I will applaud Vince for doing what he had to do for his company. I'll even applaud Bret for standing up to someone he believed was disrespectful, but maybe he went about it the wrong way. Maybe let his, again, much like Sean, let his animosity towards Sean cloud his judgment. People vilify Bret for this day. They vilify Vince for it. I don't think either of them deserve it. I don't think Vince deserves it because, like I said, I just explained why. I don't think Bret deserves it because, I'm sorry, he's not the first wrestler to refuse to do a job. I know this scenario is much different than just some guy refusing to, put some, it's not as simple as Roddy Piper not wanting to put over Paul Orndorff in Poughkeepsie or whatever. It didn't really happen. I'm just using an example, okay? But the point is, because they would still be with the company, you know what I mean? They weren't leaving the company, but Bret was. I know it's a much more high-end job with a lot more on the line. But again, it's not like Bret's the first to refuse to do a job. From what I've heard, is the only time he really refused. I don't know. There might be other accounts out there. If there is, send them to me. But from what I've heard, I think that was the only time. I do know. Okay, I will say this. I do know there was times Bret didn't like doing jobs. But he still did them. But I think that was the only time he outright refused. For Sean, I guess I learned to respect him, especially in his comeback in 2002, right up to the end of his career in 2010. He was doing stuff that was off the charts. But that being said, I found myself cheering against him. I didn't have that bitterness against him like I had when I was a kid. It's just I was cheering against Sean in a lot of feuds he was in, but not all of them. I was going for Sean in a lot of feuds too, back and forth, because I just knew how fucking amazing he was in the ring. It was hard not to cheer him sometimes. So we all know where this ended. Bret and Shawn mended fences. Bret and Vince mended fences. Bret returned in 2010. Had a little run there. That was also hit or miss. Obviously, he couldn't wrestle full time due to a stroke. And I'm going to talk about that, Bret's return, and also on a different. I'm hyping up a lot of future podcasters. It's the longest podcast I've done. I knew it was going to be long, so I'm going to wrap it up. Keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, most of what I said is in the context of me being a fan at the time. And I say this too. I've never been in Vince's position. I've never been in Bret's position. Never even been in Sean or anyone else's position in this scenario. Because what I've dealt with in the local wrestling scene, it hasn't happened. Nothing like that has even come close to happening. So I don't know. Maybe there'll come a time, like I'm talking hypothetically here for argument's sake. Maybe there will come a time where I am placed in that situation. You know? And maybe I'll see it even more Vince's way after that. Who knows? Anyway, I want to thank you all for joining me. This has been quite a trip down memory lane, a bittersweet one in a lot of ways, but one I'll never forget. A time that I will always value, despite the fact that my childhood hero, I felt my head was stripped of his dignity. I'll tune in next week for part 2, when I talk to local personalities here in Ontario about the Montreal Screwjob, get their thoughts on it. Again, my friend Bernadette, we call her the Diva. She is one of the most notorious, probably one of, if not the most notorious super fan in all of Ontario independent wrestling. Also be talking to Outlaw Scott Chase, a 20-year veteran of the Squared Circle. He was there. His perspective, I'm also really looking forward to, plus a couple others. So until next time, follow me on social media, BillChase33 on Twitter and Instagram. Just plain Bill Chase on Facebook. Add me. We'll talk wrestling. I love talking wrestling. And again, until then, this is Bill Chase, quoting a wise Hamiltonian when I tell you, don't you dare miss it. Thank you for listening to Diary of a Wrestling Fan with Bill Chase. If you'd like to make a contribution to the show, just remember, Ass Sphincter says what?